cheapest source of capital. Normally, that cheapest source of capital is going to be getting a mortgage on the property through an independent lender. Now, could it be cheaper, potentially, to get the money from the stock or from unsecured debt? Yes, it could. And here's the thing. All right. Right now, at this particular moment in time, I would argue in most instances, and San Miguel hopefully would back me up on this, you're probably going to be better off getting a mortgage as a company than necessarily doing the unsecured stock or debt. And the reason is because, I think we would all agree right now, mortgages are still at pretty much an all-time low in terms of the interest rates. Yes? But yet the return that investors would be seeking from corporate issued stocks or corporate issued bonds are probably higher right now. Now, is that always been the case? Absolutely freaking not, okay? For many years, it would have been super cheap by comparison to issue corporate issued debt, corporate issued stock, versus getting a mortgage, because mortgage rates were much higher. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so the point of what I guess I'm trying to draw out of you or trying to get you to think about is that, yeah, everything does depend. It depends on what the circumstances are right then and there as to which one is going to be your best source, but also which one is going to be your cheapest source. Now, there are a couple of other little things to sort of talk about with respect to each of these. One is, if your company were to have financial problems, they were to stop making the mortgage payment on the real estate, it would be foreclosed on and taken away. But if they had used unsecured stock or debt and the company starts losing money, in essence, especially if it's stock, there's nothing really to take away. It's just that the shareholders are losing value.
Hypothetically, if you're foreclosed upon, your share values are probably going to tank anyways, right?
Potentially, yeah.
So basically, the unsecured doesn't
But
go.
you might be able to keep your real estate, is my point.
Right.
For a longer period of time. Okay?
So basically, the unsecured goes against the company itself, but
Yes.
the mortgage will take the actual property.
Right. It's tied to the property. The mortgage is tied to the asset.
But both of them will have, like unsecured will go related to the credit for the actual
Let
company.
me make it even simpler for you. You technically could go out and buy a piece of real estate with a credit card. That's unsecured debt. If you have a high enough limit credit card, and you could go out and buy, now chances are, the maximum that you might be able to get would be maybe, $50,000 or $100,000 on that credit card, as a cash advance or whatever, but that's unsecured debt. Okay?
So basically nothing is tied to the asset.
Nothing is tied to the asset. That's why it's called unsecured. It's tied to you as the person, but not to the asset. Okay?
But the corporation is treated like a person.
Right. Okay? All right. Moving forward. All right, so what about, we've talked about this, I'm just going to try to make sure that you're paying attention. So what are a couple of the factors affecting the own versus lease decision for corporations?
Tax implications.
Okay, what else?
Special purpose.
I didn't hear you.
Anything else?
Tax legislation.
Okay,
Management expertise.
okay, all right.
Can you repeat the question?
Okay. Basically, what's the benefits and the attributes of leasing versus owning?
Estates.
Okay. All right. And think we've only got one, well, we've got a couple of calculations left, and then we're pretty much done with this. Okay. All right. All right, so one of the things, there's one little typo. I'm just gonna, on page 515, under mortgage equity approach to valuing a property. We're gonna go through this, do the calculations, and I'll point out the typo in the book. All right. 515, top of the page, appendix, real estate asset pricing and capital budgeting analysis and synthesis. Okay. 515. Okay. Even if you don't have the book, you don't need it. Okay? I'm just telling you where it's at, just so you know. All right? Now, all right. If you remember, we talked about IRV. Yes? Our good friend IRV, which is simply income divided by cap rate gives us value. Yes? Okay, everybody remembers IRV. Okay, another way of stating IRV is value would be equal to what?
Income divided by
Rate. Okay, everybody still with me? All right. So just to work a super quick little example, if we had an income of $10,000 a year and we have a cap rate or required rate of return of 10%, that means that our value is $100,000. Okay? All right, everybody remembers that, yes? Okay. Now, like everything in life, we can't keep things simple. We have to complicate things, all right? And the reason we have to complicate things is to better reflect reality, all right? Well, this transaction, the assumption behind this is what? It's an all equity, all cash deal. And it's on a before tax basis. So we're ignoring two things. We're ignoring debt and we're ignoring taxes. Okay, is everybody with me on that? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we have to do to complicate it up, if you will, is to infuse the equation with those elements. Does that make sense? And that is where this title comes from. Mortgage equity sort of valuation or approach to valuation, all right? And when we're done with this, you're gonna be like, wow, that's pretty cool because it allows you to do a little bit more of a sophisticated approach. It's not that overly complicated once you really kind of understand the pieces to it, and you'll sort of see what I mean. Okay, so what we do is we begin to kind of modify the equation. Our denominator is still going to be a rate of return, but it's going to be specifically the after-tax cost of equity, or our after-tax cap rate. Now, if you remember back to what I said when we were talking about the original IRV model, and I said cap rate. What is a cap rate? I said it's short for capitalization rate, and more specifically, it is the rate of return that is required or necessary to attract capital into the deal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so now all of a sudden, this is what we're talking about. Okay, this is still a cap rate, still a rate of return, but it is, now we're just simply calling it something a little bit tighter, if you will, by calling it the after-tax cost of equity, okay? Still a percentage, all right? That's next page.
But that's where
We're going in that direction. Right now, this is simply the after-tax cost of equity. Trust me. Okay? All right. Now, on the numerator, we still start out with net operating income. So no different than up here. Okay? Still our net operating income. But what we've got to do now is we've got to infuse that, we said, with two things. Our debt and our taxes. Okay? So let's start with the debt piece. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take that net operating income and we are going to subtract out our cost of debt times our amount of debt.
Did you say time?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I said times, I put plus. Okay. Net operating income minus our cost of debt times our amount of debt. Okay? Now, for those of you that are using your brain and actually thinking about this, to a certain extent, if we go back to our simple income statement, we have net operating income, and what do you subtract out?
Maintenance.
Annual debt service, which gives us the before-tax cash flow. Okay? So this kind of begins to, in one sense, have parallels to that, if you will. All right? So now once we've got this, then what we do, put another set of parentheses here, because that is going to be sort of self-contained, whatever that number is. And we're going to put some numbers in there, just a minute. Then, what you're going to do is you're going to multiply all of that times 1 minus tax rate. To take into account our income taxes. Okay? Everybody still with me? Okay? Then, once we've done that, kind of erase this stuff out here, so we need that. All right. So once we've got all of that, we've got one final little piece that we have to add in. So this, over here on this side, this is really taking into account, even though it's got the debt, but it's subtracting out the debt.
What's that?
Okay, cost of debt, which is your interest rate, times the amount of debt as a dollar amount. Okay? So you've got your income, you're subtracting out your cost of debt, taking and getting the tax implications of that, dividing that, and ultimately this is going to give you the value of your equity. Okay, because we're subtracting out the debt, we're not adding in the debt. So the final piece is, well, we've got to take care of the debt.
We're gonna add it.
So we're going to add out there, after we've done all of that,
The amount of it.
the amount of the debt. Okay, now let's put some numbers in there. Matter of fact, if you want to, let's use the numbers that are in the book, okay, to keep it simple. What is our net operating income? From the example that's on page 515. 115,000. Okay? All right? What is our cost of debt? 10%. Okay? What is our amount of debt? Now, this is where the typo. In the book, it shows, in the equation down there, it shows 80,000. It's 800,000. Okay? once again, in your book, it shows 80,000, it should be 800,000. Now, in the statement of the problem, it's correct, but in the calculation, it's incorrect. Okay? All right? Then 1 minus the tax rate. What is our tax rate?
20%.
20%. All right? And then on the denominator, what is our after-tax cost of equity?
14%.
14%. Okay, and then over here to the far right, what is our amount of debt?
800.
800. They got it right over there. Okay, so now, pull out your calculator, do the math. This is one of the few times that you actually have to do an equation math, okay? So some of you can go ahead and do this on your own, but let me just kind of walk you through so you don't get confused, all right? You go from left to right with this. No, I'm being very, because some of you will have a tendency to skip around and try to do one piece of it before another piece. So what I do typically is, I'm going to do the part that is in the parentheses here. So the cost of debt times the amount of debt, 10% times 800,000, that piece is 80,000. Everybody follow that? Okay, 1 minus the tax rate, also in parentheses, is going to be 0.8, correct? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, now, so we've simplified this by doing that. Sometimes you don't have to go to all this extra effort, but I'm just sort of showing you what I'm talking about. So now we've got 115,000 minus 80,000 times 0.80 divided by 0.14 plus 800,000. Everybody follow? Okay, so now simplify again. Okay, 115, where's my calculator? 115 minus 80,000 is 35,000 times 0.8. So now we've got 28,000 divided by 0.14 plus 800,000. Everybody still with me? Now some of you have already solved it, that's good, but I'm just trying to make sure that you just sort of walk your way through this. Okay, so 28,000 divided by 0.14, 200,000 plus the 800,000, and voila, the value of precisely $1 million. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Okay. So obviously, to have you do that sort of problem, I've got to give you, obviously, here are the variables that go into the equation. Now, do you need to remember, and obviously on the quiz, you don't have to remember the equation. On the test, you got to remember it, okay? Because you're obviously not going to be given it, okay?
So do well in the quiz.
Okay, moral of the story is yes, always do well in the quizzes. Or you can study harder for the test. Okay, all right, so does that make sense, everybody? Everybody's good with that? Yes, no, possibly could be.
Where does this number come out then?
That is the value of the property, using the mortgage equity model. In other words, what you're doing is it is simply, instead of us just simply taking the income the property is generating divided by a cap rate to get value, we're now, as I said, incorporating the amount of debt that the property has, the cost of that debt, and our tax rate to come up with a value estimate.
This is more accurate number than like
It's going to be a much more accurate number because you're taking into account that the property does have debt. The property does have income taxes to pay. Okay, make sense? Feel good? Okay. Now, Okay. Our final two little calculations are going to be related to weighted average cost of capital. We've only got 35 minutes to get through them. Okay. Okay. So first of all, let's just talk about what weighted average cost of capital is, also called WACC. Okay? As a company, as we've said, you've got multiple sources that you can draw money from. Okay? At the most fundamental level, this goes back and translates into you as an individual. You have predominantly two sources to get money from. One is from yourself, equity, and the other in the form of debt. Yes? Okay? That's the simplest form of sort of what we refer to as capital structure. Okay? Is debt and equity. And one of the things that you will hear quite often people talk about is the capital stack. And the capital stack is just simply how much equity do we have in there, how much debt do we have in there to comprise our capital structure. Okay, does that make sense, everybody? On a very simple, fundamental level. Now, we're going to go through all of that here in just a second. Now, you can have other forms of capital, which we are not going to have you calculate today, but I want to explain and talk about them just a little bit. One of the most common is mezzanine financing. Okay? Also called mezz finance. Why the term mezzanine? Well, it's an in-between form of financing. It's not quite debt, it's not quite equity. It's kind of a hybrid. Those of you that are familiar with traditional sort of finance lingo, it's kind of like preferred stock. Okay? Now, those of you not familiar with that, that's okay. The point being is mezzanine financing, it's going to be more expensive than debt, less expensive than equity. So that's why it's called sort of a middle ground. Okay, it's kind of it's an alternative in term or additional form of financing. So here's another way. Okay, once again to put it in vernacular that you may even relate to even more. It's kind of like getting a second mortgage to a certain extent. A second mortgage is real debt, but the point is it's a supplementary amount of responsibility that you've got to pay back. Okay, but it's usually short term in nature. Mezzanine debt is. That it's typically maybe has, whereas your normal loan might be a 20, 30-year amortization, mezz debt might only be 3 or 4 or 5 years. Okay? Now, who are the mezz debt players? Mezz debt can come from investment bankers, can come from just wealthy individuals, can come from sort of these specialized sort of venture capital groups that will help finance certain types of projects. So there's a variety of sources, if you will, of this sort of middle ground debt. Now, how does it potentially get used? Well, putting it simply, if our normal capital stack is, let's say, 20% equity, 80% debt, with mezz, it could be something like 75% debt, 10% equity, and then the remaining, what? 15% would be mezz. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. Now, in terms of, and once again, those numbers are just simply adding to 100% total. Okay? In other words, where are we getting our money from? All right? Now, that's not our cost of the money, that's just simply where are we getting it from. So those numbers just simply relate to where the money is coming from. So our cost of debt might be 5%. Matter of fact, let me put it out here so it doesn't get confusing. So our cost of debt might be 5% in both instances. Our cost of equity over here, I'm just going to maybe put, let's say it's 25%. And then based on what I said earlier, what's our mezz debt going to be? Probably somewhere in between 5 and 25, okay? So it might be 15%. I don't know, just picking the number. Okay, does that make sense? In terms of our cost. In other words, 15 is somewhere in between 5 and 25, is it not? Okay, so it could be closer to 25, it could be closer to 5, just depending on who it is you're borrowing it from.
And
Okay?
the mezz will usually buy out the debt if the equity fails, correct?
Yes. So the mezz player, you know, their concern is clearly that the project stays afloat. So if all of a sudden there begin to be problems, then they may just say, okay, guys, you can't afford to make these payments. We're taking it over. We're going to buy out the debt and take possession of the property. Okay, so it's an extra layer.
Otherwise, it would have zero
Yeah.
if the debt.
Correct, if the debt were to fail. Okay, all right. Now, why would you, as the equity player, be willing to engage in that sort of relationship? Very simply put, you're going to put in half as much money. In other words, instead of, if we're talking about $1 million project, here you're having to come up with what? 20% or 200,000. Here you're only having to come up with 10% or 100,000. So that's a big difference, coming up with 100,000 versus 200,000. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay. Now, the other piece that begins to be kind of interesting is, well, we are also taking on a little bit less debt, and the majority of the change over here is the mezz piece, okay? Now, what we're going to do real quickly is we're going to calculate the weighted average cost of capital for both of these scenarios, okay? So let's show you how you do it. Okay, over here is going to be the debt piece, and here's the equity piece, okay, for our first example. Okay, the debt piece, we're going to do cost of debt, over here, percentage of debt. Over here, cost of equity or return on equity, another term to sort of look out for. And over here, percent equity. Now, another term we could put over here, instead of percent of debt, loan to value ratio. There's another term for it.
Hold on, is it cost of debt on the second one times what?
Okay. Cost of debt, which is your interest rate,
Exactly.
times the percentage of the debt in your capital structure, also known as the loan to value ratio. So in the first scenario, our cost of debt is the 5%. 5%. Everybody see that? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay. Our percentage of debt, or our loan to value ratio in the first scenario, is what? Okay, everybody see that? Okay. Then on the equity side, our return on equity or our cost of equity is what? 25%. And then our amount of equity as a percentage is what of the capital structure? 20%. Okay, everybody with me?
The last one, what is it?
This is the percentage of equity. In other words, how much money are you going to put down? Your equity contribution to the project. So in this case, 20%.
And cost of equity, right?
I'm sorry?
Cost of equity times equity.
Yes. Okay, so doing the math on this will give you the weighted average cost of capital for that particular capital structure. Okay, so let's do the math. Now the way I would tend to do this, I'm trying to give you a heads up on it, you can do it a couple of different ways. I tend to do it as follows, to do 0.05 times 0.80 plus 0.25 times 0.20. Now you're saying, why did you even write that out? Yeah, that's implicit, we understand. You would be surprised at how many people will mix and match their numbers on this. They'll put 5 in as a whole number and then multiply that by 80%, and then over here they'll put 25% in as a percentage, but then multiply this. You've got to be consistent all the way across, regardless of whichever way you do it. Okay? All right, so 0.05 times 0.8 gives us 0.04 plus 0.25 times 0.2, 0.05. Add those together, you get 0.09 or 9% as the weighted average cost of capital. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yes.
So now, what does that number mean? Okay, we've gone through all of that. That simply means that is our before-tax cost of capital, all right? That is, in essence, just simply taking into account what is our cost of debt, what is our cost of equity combined together, that if we were to have an all-purpose source of capital, a singular source, it would really be the equivalent of 9%. Okay, does that make sense?
So this is the before tax?
Correct. Okay? Now, I want you to do the same exact thing, but now include mezz. Now, what do you think you have to do that?
Add it.
You're just going to add in one more little set of brackets. You're going to do a plus, open parentheses, percentage of mezz, and cost of mezz, or cost of mezz, percentage of mezz. It doesn't really matter in this case which order, but in other words, 15% times 15%. But you've also got to change the numbers up for these to reflect, obviously, the new paradigm. Okay? So I'm going to do it down here. Okay. So if we just sort of follow what we did up above, debt, equity, and then now adding in mezz. Okay. Both numbers in the mezz are 15%, so basically 15% times 15%, and then you're filling in the remainder. Okay. For the equity, your cost of equity is 25%, your percent equity is 10%, your debt, your cost of debt is 5%, your percentage of debt is 75%. Okay, does everybody see what I did? Okay, now all you're going to do is the math to solve all the way across. Okay, so once again, 0.05 times 0.75, I get 0.0375. Okay, 0.25 times 0.1, 0.025, 0.15 times 0.15, 0.0225. Okay. Everybody match up? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you got to add all those together. Make sure, once again, this is one instance where decimals matter, okay, in terms of Don't.
What's you just doing on the bottom there?
All this is just simply taking this times this gives you this. This
Oh,
times this gives
gotcha.
you that. This times this gives you that.
Sorry.
No, I thought you were
Okay. Okay. So this came from there. Okay? Equity came from there. Mezz came from there.
Net profit, all of those are given.
Correct. I would simply say your cost of equity is 25%. Your percentage equity is 10%. But you got to put it into the formula to solve it. Okay, so let's add those up across the bottom to actually get our weighted average cost of capital for this. 0.0375 plus 0.025 plus 0.0225 gives us 0.085 or 8.5%. So, simple lesson to be learned from this. Was it a good thing or a bad thing to take on the mezz debt? Good thing. It lowered our cost of capital a whole half a point, from 9% down to 8.5%. Why is that good? That simply means we're going to have lower debt payments, higher return. Okay? Make sense?
Last question, what's the portion for the missing?
What's the portion for what?
Well, so percent and then,
Lower cost and then because the rate
Okay,
go.
well, I can't hear your question. Okay.
From 9% to 8%.
and you had cost of debt times percentage.
Right.
So for the mezzanine, it's.
Same thing. And it just so happens that both of them, both the cost of debt as well as the mezz debt in this example, both happen to be 15%. Okay?
It's better because it's lower than the.
Yeah, because your cost of capital is a whole 0.5% lower. Yeah, in other words, think of it like this. All right, so 8.5 versus 9%. Let's just, all right. So assume that we're talking about a $10 million project, which is not that big of a project. So $10 million project, 12 payments per year.
That's the we're talking about the same type.
Yeah, well, just, you'll see. Okay. So $10 million project, 12 payments per year, and let's say it's a 30-year mortgage, and the interest rate is 9%. That's what the first one was, right? Is that right? Is it 9.5 or 9 and 8.5? Is that right?
Nice.
Yeah, 9 versus 8.5. Okay. So your payment, your monthly payment, just to put things into perspective here for a second. $80,462.26 would be the monthly payment times 12 would be $965,547.14 annual payment. Okay. Now, let's assume keep same problem. Change the interest rate to 8.5%. Solve for payment. $76,891.35 monthly times 12 would be $922,696.18. The difference difference of $42,850 per year times 30 years, $1,285,528 savings in interest over the life of that loan. So was it worth getting that 0.5% reduction?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at it just in simple terms, assume that your job at a development firm is to find the cheapest sources of capital. That's your whole job. And you were able to get a full 0.5 point savings, you in essence would come close to paying a good portion of your salary just on that one single deal. Okay, you follow sort of my logic? Okay, so that's what I'm saying. You know, people, you don't inherently think of, oh, no, I don't want to have to go out and find mezzanine financing. That's going to take me more time. Well, okay, it's worth $42,000 a year for you to spend that extra amount of time to go and get that mezzanine financing.
Sometimes the landlord will provide the match as well, right?
And that's another possibility as well.
Oh,
What are you saying?
came up with a 25% cost of equity finance.
But wait, before in that scenario, you're not taking into consideration the change in the capital stack, or do you?
No, well, I mean, you're looking at our overall, I'm trying to look at our overall cost of capital. This is our overall cost of capital.
Okay.
Not actually our interest rate, our overall cost of capital.
Effective rate of order.
In other words, that's why we can actually lump in the whole project, all $10 million, debt, equity, mezz.
Okay.
And we're comparing basically apples to apples with respect to the 9% versus the 8.5%.
But so how do you come up with the 25% cost of equity?
Because, okay, one more thing.
Okay.
So, the thing to focus on here is, this is not the mortgage interest rate in either of these scenarios. This is your weighted average cost of capital interest rate, if you will, which includes your equity, your debt, and in this case, your mezz. Okay, so it's a different sort of calculation. We would have to parse it out even further to get down to what is your actual cost of debt, your actual cost of mezz, your actual, but this is a good approximation to be able to see what is really my savings going to be. That's all I was trying to illustrate with that.
How do you build in the promote on the equity?
We're going to deal with that next week. No, we are. We're going to deal with that part of it next week. We're dealing with all the deal structure stuff next week. Deal structure is next week. Yep.
Before tax.
This is before tax. That's, I'm almost there, I promise you. Okay? Okay, now. Okay. One final piece, and then it's time for the quizzes, okay? Almost there. Okay. All right. Okay, so we've got, in the case of looking at this on an after-tax basis, okay, we're still going to have, for the most part, very similar sort of thing, all right? So let's just say we use kind of the same general numbers we've been using for this. We've got 5% was our cost of debt, and our capital structure in terms of the amount of debt we had on the original one was what? Or it was just debt equity, what was it?
80.
80, okay, thank you for that. 80%, okay? And then on the equity side, it was a 25% cost of equity or return on equity times, 20% capital structure, okay? That's nothing different, that's exactly what we had up previously, just rewriting it so that we can begin to attack it. Now, your question was, where do we come up with that 25%? How do we determine what is an appropriate rate of return for our equity? Pretty much reach and grab it, but to a certain extent, what you're doing is internally within the company, within, you know, sort of your own kind of risk profile, you're trying to say, for this particular deal, what is going to be the hurdle rate, what is going to be the required rate that we feel is appropriate for this deal. It's not an absolute science. I mean, it is a sort of thing, and usually it's going to be predicated on what we talked about last week, which was simply saying, what are your other alternatives that you could be investing in, and the relative risk of those alternative investments to this particular investment. Because theoretically, what should happen in reality is every single deal that you evaluate should have a different required return. Okay? Because if I'm looking at a retail deal, I'm gonna be saying that retail deal has a heck of a lot more risk to me than if I'm investing in multifamily housing.
That's what you want to get. That's what you shoot for.
That's what you want to get. But what happens as a matter of practice in some cases is you have a firm that has a policy that is simply our absolute minimum required return on equity is X percent. 15%, 20%, 25%. We will not look at any deal unless it has that minimum required return. Okay? Make sense?
Makes sense.
Okay. Okay. So, all we're going to do here is you're simply going to take into account the taxes. It's a really simple calculation. What do you think you're going to do?
1 minus X.
You're going to multiply something. You're going to multiply something times 1 minus the tax rate.
Okay.
Now, which part of this? It's not going to be all of it. Let me preface it. It's not going to be all.
The debt.
Okay? It's going to be the debt. All right? So over here, you're going to multiply that times 1 minus the tax rate, which in this case, we said for our example, what did we use? Did we have one? We didn't have one for that example.
20%.
Okay, so let's use 20%, so that was, okay? So now, let's just kind of work through the math here, all right? So 0.05 times 0.8 gives us 0.04 for that piece. Then multiplied by 1 minus the tax rate would be multiplying it by 0.8. Did everybody see that? Okay. And then all of that plus okay. And then we simplify that. So 0.04 times 0.8 gives us 0.032 plus 0.05, oops, and gives us 8.2% or 0.082. All right, so this is our after-tax weighted average cost of capital. Now you notice it is lower. Okay, well, yeah. The reason is because we're getting the benefit of the debt with the interest rate on the debt, lowering our tax liability because, in essence, we get a tax deduction on interest. Yes?
Yes.
So that's what that takes into account. Does that make sense? Yes or no?
So repeat that again.
Okay.
Sorry.
With debt, the benefit of debt is you get a tax deduction on the interest off of that debt. So what is this 0.05 times 80. That's your interest cost, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay? So what we're saying is that your before tax cost of interest is 4%. Your after tax cost of debt is 3.2%. Added to the equity piece of 5 means your overall cost of capital is 8.2 on an after tax basis. Okay? All right, any other questions?
So if you had to choose one, definitely.
Well, it's not, you're not choosing, in this case, between after tax and before tax. You're just simply saying, what is it? Because you're, like for example, the simple example would be this. What if you're not for profit? If you're not for profit, you don't pay income tax. So your cost is simply the before tax cost. Okay? If you're an individual, you're going to more than likely have to pay the after tax cost. Yep.
If you add the mezz component to this,
Yep.
you're paying the tax.
The mezz is going to
Have the tax associated.
correct, correct.
So you do it again.
Yes. Yep. But I'm not having you do one of those on the quiz, okay? I might do that on the test, but not on the quiz.
I plan on doing well on this.
Okay, all right. Just kidding. Yes.
I have a good question.
Yep.
On the book, there was an example there that talks about base of calculation. I think on the example number 2, actually 15-3, I think, where it calculates the reversion.
Yep.
You have you take off the mortgage balance, you have the
Yep.
reversion of 50,
Yep.
and you have a
Yep.
base of 1.05. How did you get that 1.05 million? That base?
What page is it, or what?
It's a 15.3, I think. 15-3. I don't have the actual book with me. I usually use the book.
Okay, 15-3, you're talking about, okay, the basis. Okay, so the reversion in that particular example, that they're saying, that is the, in essence, sort of the sale price. The basis is what we talked about, I guess at least a week or two ago, in terms of the tax basis. This is what the depreciated basis in the property is, which would be, what was your acquisition cost minus your accumulated depreciation would be your basis. That's how they would have gotten it. Okay? Yep.
Is it always going to be that way?
What do you mean?
I'm always going to calculate, multiply the tax to the debt part, or it's only for this problem?
For this kind of problem, yes.
Always.
Like this.
Only like this.
Yes.
It's not.
No, I mean, as a general rule, because debt has a tax benefit, so that is the reason why you show what the tax benefit is by doing this calculation. Okay. Yeah, over there. Wrong one. Okay, this is the quiz for chapter 14. Now, the way we're going to do this, I know you don't always like the way I do things, but that's okay. You're going to do the quiz for chapter 14 first. Once you're done with the quiz for chapter 14, you will come in and turn it in. I will grade it, and I will give you the quiz for chapter 15. Yes, I will be giving you your answer sheet here in just a second. I'm going to let you go ahead and start working on it. I'll dig those out. Everybody's got the question sheet. Okay, has everybody got their answer sheet now? Okay, making sure.